Hi everyone, my name's Danielle. Welcome to another episode of Board Game Bakes. This week we're going to focus on Wonderbook by DV Games. In the game, there's different chapters that have different cards, and you go through the scenario. You get to make choices, get characteristics, then you have an awesome board that you explore, and it's a pop-up book. So there's actually elements that you could push and pull that move and you get to interact with, and there's a hidden villain underneath too. So we're actually going to try and recreate that tree book experience, and we're going to do it with a gingerbread tree and an apple cake, and we're going to try and add all the different elements so it looks just like the pop-up book. Let's get started. To make your apple cake, sift 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 3 teaspoons baking powder, 1 1/2 teaspoons baking soda, and 3/4 teaspoon of salt in a small bowl. In a large bowl, mix 3/6 of melted unsalted butter, 6 eggs, 3 cups of sugar, and 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla extract until it's well blended. Add the dry ingredients into the wet ingredients and mix until it's just combined. Now for the interesting part. Add in apple pieces from 6 apples that have been peeled, cored, and cut into small bite-sized pieces. This will make the batter very chunky. As you'll see, I tried using 2 pans to make a double layer cake, but this was not going to happen. So I took the batter off of my second tray, most gracefully, and fill in the holes in my first one. Bake it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 35 to 45 minutes. Make sure you use a skewer in the center of the cake and have it come out clean, which is a little hard to tell for this cake because there's so many apples. To make your brown sugar frosting, combine 1/2 cup packed light brown sugar and 2 1/2 sticks of softened unsalted butter on medium-low and mix until it becomes creamy and sticks to the side of the bowl. If you want to, you could try putting the brown sugar in the food processor to make it a little less gritty. I tried it, but honestly couldn't really tell much of a difference. Brown sugar frosting just seems odd to have a little bit of grit, but it's delicious. Add in 2 1/2 cups of powdered sugar, about 1/2 cup at a time, so you don't get splattered with powdered sugar. Once it's all mixed in, add in 2 tablespoons of heavy cream, or 1/2 and 1/2 seem to work well too, 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, and 1/8 teaspoon of salt. Mix on medium speed until it's all combined, and then put it on medium-high for 8 minutes, which seems like a long time, but it makes it super soft and fluffy. Let's switch to our gingerbread tree. This is the same recipe as my Everdell tree. Apparently I like doing trees, and my father's work, so if you need the recipe, I'll put the link in the corner. The easiest way to make stencils is to take the image and blow it up as big as you want it to be, and then create little pieces to match it, or if you actually print it, you can just cut out the separate pieces. Roll your gingerbread to 1/4 inch thickness, and use a sharp knife to cut out your shapes. Try to fit them onto one cookie sheet, or on separate ones depending on how much space you have, because the goal is that you want them to cool completely on the pan before you take them off, and this will help make them sturdier and not break. Bake them at 350 degrees for 12 to 15 minutes. To decorate, use a light brown, thick royal icing to outline the sections of your trees and leaves. Once that icing is dried, flood the leaf areas on the tree with a flooding consistency yellow royal icing. For flooding consistency, you want the ribbons of icing while you're mixing it to disappear in 5 to 10 seconds. You all have one little tree that you color a green to. For the bark areas, flood with a light brown that is slightly darker than the one you used to outline it. Give all the areas that you flood 2 hours to dry before you add your final details. For your tree, use your thick brown royal icing to add some lines on it. For the leaves, get a darker orange color to add shade to the leaves. You can use a paintbrush or a balled up paper towel to add some texture. And then you could also use some edible brown paint to add additional lines and bring your tree to life. Doing the actual book, start with putting the cake on the cake board or a piece of cardboard, no judgment. Apply a thin layer of brown sugar buttercream on the small and larger cake. I made 1 batch of the frosting and it was enough to cover the cake. The apple cake recipe I used originally had no frosting on it, so I didn't really want a thick layer of frosting. Put the cakes in the fridge once they're iced, and this will let it harden a little bit before you apply your fondant. To prepare your fondant, roll it so it's about 1/8 of an inch thick, or you can even make it a little thinner just to get those extra corners. I made the large cake fondant very thin, and I may have had to do a bit of surgery, but it was all getting covered with paint anyway, so it'll work for me. Once they're covered and smooth, put the fondant cake back in the fridge. This way it'll harden and be a good surface for painting. Now it's time to practice your painting skills, which I've been doing a lot recently apparently. For the small cake, use a brush or a roll of paper towel to dab orange around the border and put some brown in the middle. You could attempt to smooth it out in the center and leave room for some tree rings later. This is the first coat, and just mainly focusing on what you see below the roots. Once the edible paint has dried, use white with a hint of brown to add the tree roots. Take a thin brush and use some darker brown to add shadows to those roots too. For the large book, pick a spot and just go to town. I start with the blue and purple in the back, probably because I like those colors. Take some brown for the paths and pink for the vortex corners. Do you like storybook games? I actually really like games that have the app, which I know is very controversial, but I really like when they read it to you, like in Mansions of Madness. Use a forest green to fill in the rest of the area on the top of your cake. It's okay if you leave some of the center white since you're going to be covering it with a small cake. While that's drying, roll out a small piece of fondant to create your lizard and little dragon looking creatures. You can either cut out the shapes first and then paint them, or you can paint them and then cut it out, as seen by the fact that I did each one differently. You're in the cake home stretch now. Put your painting skills to the test to add darker patches of green, details on your animals, and more depth to your path. You can always add more details, and sometimes the problem I have is knowing when to stop. For me, it's usually when I literally have no more time and I need to go to bed. The next step is to make our glue. This would be very close to impossible using royal icing, but I have discovered the ways of caramel and I'm not going back. Can't make me. It's super easy to make. Here's just a cup of sugar heating on medium-low heat that you stir occasionally. Once it's thinned, it is ready to use. The tricky part is keeping it so it doesn't solidify or burn, so you kind of have to move your heat up and down depending on what it needs. Start by gluing your tree trunk base together and make sure they're at an angle. You only need to hold it for about 10 to 15 seconds just to make sure it's set. Next, prep your supports in the back, and then you want to recruit some help to add your remaining two parts of the trunk. This way you could put the trunk parts on and then they can hold it there while you go and get the supports. Now it's time to add on our different leaf sections. In hindsight, I may have just made the pieces that had the trunk and the leaves on it, but oh well, these get to go on top. So add your leaf sections, and those are all going to go mainly on the front structure. However, the hands you create go on the back. Once your tree is assembled, it's time to put our components together. Take out your large book. Time to do some finishing touches. Use a brown to put the binding on your book. There's also yellow in two corners and on the spine. Use a ruler and a black edible marker to add lines to your book. Put your cute little friends on the cake. Now put the second layer on top, and if you follow my advice from earlier, your animals will not be squished. Sorry guys. Add on your show-stopping tree. To bring it together, dab on some green royal icing, especially on the base of the tree. This will help it blend in. And you could also put it around various parts where you have green on the cake to just kind of make that color clearly on all the different layers of your cake. You can add some yellow flowers and use some white or off-white thick royal icing to add the lines that tell you where the different sections are on the board. Phew! We're done. Time to eat and start our adventure. Here we go! Thanks for watching another episode of Board Game Bake. I've been having probably a little bit too much fun with these gingerbread structures once I discovered that you could use caramel instead of royal icing. In case you haven't watched this, I'm very baffled and amazed because usually you have to prop things up and they take forever to dry and they fall down and your heart and soul's crushed. Or apparently you could use caramel and you just hold it there for like 10-15 seconds and it stays. Is anyone else's mind blown? Mine's blown. I will never go back. Only forward! And next week Bake may have a similar gingerbread thing because why work on one cake when you can work on two? And I'm not really sure that's a good question, but it's what I did. So tune in next time for another fun gingerbread adventure. Keep playing games and keep them sweet. Bye!